this class. I had no idea what I wanted to teach. I'm in the process of writing a book-length memoir about my son's adoption. And so I think that's why Chris asked me to teach memoir instead of poetry. And, but I wasn't, during the semester I wasn't fully engaged by the project. This summer I've been writing a lot, and I started to see some kind of problem areas, the kind of obstacles that stood in my way. And so I wanted to talk today about one of those things so that I could work through it, and then hopefully if you encounter this obstacle, then you can work through it as well, right? And let me try and explain this, and let me back up and try to explain this in a different way. My mother is from Puerto Rico, and every summer and every winter we would fly to Puerto Rico with my family, and I'd hang out with my cousins, and we'd play on the beach, we'd sail, eat a very different kind of food than we ate when we were in Washington, D.C. It was very kind of alien, but also somehow fantastic, right? It was almost magical, right? Edenic. And now, at 39, I still go to Puerto Rico, not as often. My grandmother has passed away, my cousins have grown up. We don't really talk as often, though some of my fondest memories are with them. Even though so much time has passed, every time the plane door opens, when we land in Puerto Rico, I look out the window. That sight is so familiar. The water, the mangroves, the airport, and I get very excited. But when the plane door opens, the smell that I associate with Puerto Rico, it's kind of humidity and it's kind of warmth. It's almost, it's almost, palpable. And then just the smell of those kinds of that vegetation just brings me right back to those memories and the emotions associated with those memories. And so I started to think about the way that memory can be tied into space, and a way that you can try and capture not just a story, but something that you are truly engaged by, something that brings emotions up before you even think about it, right? And I wanted us to kind of think about those spaces that, for whatever reason, evoke these powerful memories, vivid memories, and the emotions associated with them, okay? And I brought a couple examples of texts that I think do this quite well. The first one, you may be familiar with these. The first one is by Carolyn Forche. It's a short piece, and it is I'm not going to tell you what it's about, but have you guys read this one, The Colonel? Are you familiar with this? Yeah? Okay, and then good, I'm glad. The second one, you probably are. Right. The second one is, I'm hoping you're not familiar with this. The second one is from a book-length memoir called Autobiography of a Face by Lucy Greeley. Are you familiar with this book? Okay. I highly recommend it, and I'll give you a little bit of background before we read this excerpt so you can get a better sense of what's happening. I selected these two pieces because in both of them, the narrative takes place within a space that that almost seems to contain the emotion. It's almost not coming from the speaker, but from almost the air of the rooms themselves, right? And so let's go ahead and look at these. Let's look at the first one, talk about what we like about it, how it's working, and kind of discover what our insights are from their larger insights. The Colonel. What you have heard is true. I was in his house. His wife carried a tray of coffee and sugar. His daughter filed her nails. His son went out for the night. There were daily papers, pet dogs, a pistol on the cushion beside him. The moon swung bare on its black cord over the house. On the television was a cop show. It was in English. Broken bottles were embedded in the walls around the house to scoop the kneecaps from a man's legs or cut his hands to lace. On the windows, there were gratings like those in liquor stores. We had dinner, rack of lamb, good wine. A gold bell was on the table for calling the maid. The maid brought green mangoes, salt, a type of bread. I was asked how I enjoyed the country. There was a brief commercial in Spanish. His wife took everything away. There was some talk then of how difficult it had become to govern. The parrot said, "Hello," on the terrace. The colonel told it to shut up and pushed himself from the table. My friend said to me with his eyes, "Say nothing." The colonel returned with a sack used to bring groceries home. He spilled many human ears on the table. They were like dried peach halves. There is no other way to say this. He took one of them in his hands, shook it in our faces, dropped it into a water glass. It came alive there. "I am tired of fooling around," he said. "As for the rights of anyone, tell your people they can go fuck themselves." He swept the ears to the floor with his arm and held the last of his wine in the air. "Something for your poetry, no?" he said. Some of the ears on the floor caught this scrap of his voice. Some of the ears on the floor were pressed to the ground. So, let's just begin with your initial impressions. Did you want to say something about your initial impression?
Me?
Yes.
No, I didn't raise my hand, but since you have got me here, I think this first sentence is great.
Uh-huh.
It really grabs me.
Uh-huh.
Because I've never read a sentence like that before, and I'm thinking, I might steal it sometime and use it. And honestly, and I'll also think, I want to read the rest of this because I want to know.
You're immediately drawn in. What is it that I've heard or not heard? And you're right in the middle of a conversation.
And he's going to confess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
There's a nice mix of emotion and fact.
Good. Like, give me an example of a really vivid fact, and give me an example of an emotion. Can you do that? Or anybody? What imagery or concrete details really stood out for you?
The broken bottles.
Okay, that's right. That's where people often, it's one place where people often start to say, this isn't a typical house, right? Something's a little off here.
But you think you're in Latin America?
Yes, good. That the specific details make it very clear. What
really is the giveaway? The broken glass.
The
thieves out.
Yes, yeah. There are a number of them though, right? The cop shows in English, but then the commercials were in Spanish. The parrot, the mangoes. Clearly the speaker who speaks English is in a foreign place, right? She's not really familiar with these things, some kind of bread. Even the syntax that's used gives you a clue that that the colonel is not American, right? Because he says, "Something for your poetry." No? We don't do that in English, but we do that in Spanish. So it becomes clear that this is in Latin America, Central or South America. Right? Good. So as a result, because of the concrete details that you're talking about in these facts, she doesn't have to give us a lot of exposition. She doesn't have to say, instead of beginning what you have heard is true, she could have begun, back in 1980 blank, I was living in El Salvador. I was writing poetry, you know what I mean? Giving us all this background information. We don't need it, right? Because the concrete details of the room, right, give it to us. What about the emotion? Oh, what were we going to say?
I was just going to say, just the first two sentences that are very short, and really, if you might not tell you anything, but they do. Like, what you have heard is true. I was in his house. They're very powerful because they are so short.
Yes.
So you know this was someone dangerous, and so it sets a tone.
Absolutely. This short, it's ironic that this tiny little simple, the most simple sentence can set such a powerful tone, right? It goes against our intuition, right? But it works.
Yeah.
Maybe
And
you want to continue to go on and read there.
Absolutely. And actually, most of the sentences are simple like this, which makes, when I read it, I always think this person doesn't want to miss a thing. I'm going to tell you in the most simple terms what happened so that, because I don't even know what's important. I'm so shocked by what just happened that I can't determine whether the mangoes and the type of bread is as important as the bag of ears. They're both presented with the same sentence structure. There is no emphasis placed on one over the other, which creates a very strange tone in us, right? A very kind of strange response.
There's a huge amount of emotion in the fact of the pistol on the cushion.
Right, right.
Well, that is really loaded.
Well, that the concrete detail evokes the emotion. If you aren't sitting up by this point, you better be at when you hear about the pistol, right? And what makes it even more powerful is that it is given as much emphasis as the daughter filing her nails. That's what makes it so powerful. So what happens here is that the writer gives the space this great attention. And though this experience happened to this speaker, right, we are told from the very beginning that this is the speaker's point of view. When the story really starts to happen, it's almost like it's not coming from her, that it's in the air, that it's palpable, right? It's as if this room contains, and the details of this room contain the emotions that she felt, right? She doesn't say, I was terrified, I was confused, I was this. She doesn't have to, because the room is described in such a way, the events are described in such plain terms, right, and given such precise detail that we experience it. It's as if we're in the room experiencing it ourselves. Does that make sense? Yeah. Okay. So one of the things that I struggle with in memoir is I want to tell my story. It's a real ego-driven impulse, right? This is my story. I want to tell it. So I'm always focusing on me. And I always run into trouble when I do that. The writing becomes terribly problematic. It's boring. I'm bored with it. But when I do that, I have to remind myself that I can't get in the way of the story I want to tell. And that's me getting in the way. And so to move out of the way of the story and let the events unfold and let the story unfold, I start to focus on the room. How does the room, what details about the room help to convey the tone or the emotions that I want to convey in the reader? Does that make sense? Okay. All right, let's look at another example to help out. Okay, so like I said, Autobiography of a Face is a book-length memoir by Lucy Greeley, and in this book, Lucy Greeley, when she was younger, was diagnosed with bone cancer in her jaw, and at a young age had a large portion of her jaw removed. And so the book kind of addresses her childhood and then struggling with this surgery and the way people saw her face. And yet, I never really feel like the book is self-centered. I never feel like she's self-important. She manages to tell this very personal story in a way and without getting in the way, right? So here's a moment. She's in the hospital, right? And she kind of likes being in the hospital. She gets a lot of attention. She doesn't get attention at home. There's a kind of hierarchy there, which is really interesting. Like those people with the worst illnesses are kind of somehow seen as most important, right? And so there's this hierarchy, and they kind of have free reign. It's a very kind of interesting story. Anyway, this candy striper is there, and they easily manipulate her, right? And they've heard that there are animals in the basement, and they want to see the animals. They love animals, and they think this is going to be great. So they manipulate the candy striper into taking them down there. As I read this, keep in mind how she evokes the emotion from you as a reader, okay? How she uses the space to capture the emotions. We pushed open the doors and found ourselves in a large room. Equipment of various sorts lined the walls, and in the middle stood 4 interlocking pens with metal poles for sides. In 2 of the pens were pigs, and in the other 2, sheep. They had no bedding, and the concrete floor, dribbled with urine, sloped downward toward a system of drains. My first thought was, how can they sleep on concrete? The animals had been lying down, but our entrance startled them. They stood up, the sheep bleating hoarsely, and the pigs harumphing, very human-sounding, and circled the tight interior of their pens. I'd never been so close to pigs before, and these were enormous. Pigs have human eyes, blue, with round pupils. After staring at you, they look away, and you can see the whites of their eyes. Counter to every feeling I'd ever had about an animal before, I had no desire to go nearer. We all just stood there in the doorway. Surely things were said, but I don't remember any conversation. As the sheep paced around, I noticed that patches of fleece had been shaved away in raw geometrics, framed for recently sutured incisions. One of the sheep had what looked like a plastic bag sewn into her side. We stepped back out and went into the next room, where dogs had started barking. Half a dozen beagles in reasonably large cages greeted us joyously. One of the dogs looked unhappy and sick and ignored us, but the rest pushed with all their weight against the bars as we approached. As I neared the first one's cage, however, he stopped barking and growled at me. The candy striper heard and warned me not to get any closer to the dogs, most of whom looked desperate for attention. All of a sudden, I hated her with her stupid outfit and shrill, silly voice. Desperation saturated the room in those loud, whining cries, pacing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I was overwhelmed. On each cage door was a sign with handwritten details about the dog, filled with alien words. Instead of water dishes, they had bottles with tubes they could lick, giant versions of what my gerbils used back home. Despite the warning, I let the dogs lick my fingers through the bars. The tenor of the expedition was shifting rapidly, taking on a slow, almost viscous quality. Our teenaged grown-up tried to hurry us along, now aware that she'd made a mistake. The next room was lined with cages. The wall directly across from the door was filled with cages of white mice, and to our right was an entire wall of cats, cage after cage stacked upon each other. Most were tabbies. I'd never seen so many cats in one place, and yet it was eerily silent. They crouched in their cages and stared at us, every single one of them, as we filed into the room. As we got closer, some of them came up to the bars of their cages and rubbed, opening their mouths soundlessly. Years later, I learned that it is not uncommon to cut the vocal cords of laboratory cats, especially if there are a lot of them. They had the same water bottles and handwritten signs as the beagles, but their cages were smaller. A number of the cats had matchbox-sized rectangles with electrical wires implanted in their skulls. The skin on their shaved scalps was crusty and red where it joined the metal. It was too much now. There was a sound of monkeys in the next room, but we turned and left. In the elevator, no one spoke. In the tunnels, no one spoke. A sad, groping presence accompanied us all the way back to the ward, where the lunch trays were just arriving and the aroma of spaghetti filled the halls. When asked where we'd been, our candy striper replied casually that we'd gone for a walk, and not one of us said anything to the contrary. Sooner or later, we all have to learn the words with which to name our own private losses, but then we just stood there in front of the nurse's desk, speechless. So, what's your impression of this one?
Is this an experimental?
Yeah, they're doing experiments on the animals down in the basement. So the patients, they're just children, right? The children think they want to be around animals. Animals are generally bring about joy, but then when they get there, they see something very unexpected, right? What do you think? What's your impression? The whole book isn't like that, by the way. There are lots of humorous parts too. I know it's very and it doesn't need to be a negative experience to create a really powerful emotion in your reader. Of course, I just think that these are great examples, so that's why I'm using it. What's your impression?
That ending is a surprise. It reminds me of stories that used to be written by O. Henry, that years ago that I used to enjoy. They all had a very surprise ending.
Mm-hmm. Why is it It is surprising. Why? Why does it surprise you?
Because the whole thing kind of left me hanging until right at the end.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Because she's spending so much time looking at just examining the rooms without commenting too much on how it relates to her, right? Yeah. But how does it? Oh, go ahead.
I was also just going to say that it kind of ties the writer to the reader, where like the reader gets the end of that, and the writer's like, I don't know what to say. That makes the emotion more powerful.
Right, absolutely. What else seems kind of remarkable?
The perspective is really good. It's like from a child's perspective with a grown-up saying what the child's thinking.
Right.
It's really good.
That's exactly right. A memoir, even if you're writing about a childhood experience, no one thinks you're a child when you're writing it. You have to write from an adult perspective, right? So, yeah, good. Yeah.
What I noticed more than anything as we go along is the movement. We pushed open the doors, and then it's our entrance startled them. So it's like I'm going down and underlining. And then at the very end she explains, I had no desire to go nearer to these animals. And then we stepped back out of the door. And then she says, like, it is a journey. The tenor of the expedition was shifting. And then in the end, it's like we stepped out of the room and left, and then the elevator, the tunnel.
Right.
So you get this sense of a very insular, secretive, and horrible.
Underground,
Yes.
like what's beneath all of this.
That's
right?
where she's not really explaining, except you get like this sense of movement, the whole stepping back, the animals, the dogs coming up to, joyously.
It's like a camera that's moving into the room, scanning it, taking a step back, moving into another room, scanning it. Moments of reflection, but really it's this capturing of it. And you're right, and all of these details help to communicate the sentiment of the speaker, right? Of the narrator, right? And being underground, being in this kind of confined space. So these all help a lot. Mm-hmm. What else seems remarkable about this, or interesting?
That humans and animals will be treated in the same facility.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So there are ways in which, without saying this, we look at the animals and we understand that we're supposed to make a connection between the animals and the children, which is horrifying, right? It's done in part because they're both in the same location, right? What else helps us to identify this connection between the narrator and the animals?
like you get the sense that they're almost human.
Yeah.
To her.
Why? Why?
Why? Because she could see their suffering,
Uh-huh.
and she identifies with them.
But how does she say that? She doesn't say,
No.
I identify with them. How does she create that without ever saying it?
Well, when she also says about when she's going closer to the dogs and the candy striper,
Mhm,
and then she says, I hated her
Mhm.
with her stupid outfit and shrill voice.
Because she was feeling sympathy for, by hating her, she was kind of feeling sympathy.
And then in
for-
the end, when she says, it's like there's no difference between the animals and her. We all have our private losses.
Right, exactly.
And so I'm not thinking of people, I'm thinking of the animals and her, and then how we're all,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in the end, she reflects on it, but we're prepared for it. They're both in the same space. The way she describes the pigs is having human eyes. They look at you, they look away, right? And then the cats can't meow. Their vocal cords have been removed. At the end, they're speechless. They don't even know how to articulate what they're experiencing yet. This book is that articulation, right? But at that moment, she's incapable. They are all incapable, right? And she does it. When I read this, I never feel like this is self-serving. I don't feel like she's self-important or pitying herself. She's actually talking about a human experience through her own particular life, right? And she does it by almost capturing the emotion in the room, not just felt by her, though primarily it seems, but seemingly felt by everybody in there, right? Anything else? All right. So how about an exercise? Is that good? Yes? No? I hope you have pens. All right. Well, that's what we're doing, so I hope you like it. This is an exercise that I stole from Mark Doty. So I don't know if you've read his poetry or his memoir. It's really amazing. And many, many years ago, I took a class with him at the University of Houston. And he presented this exercise to us. And I think what I liked about it is, what I realized, many years later, 13 years later, is that what he was trying to do was to get us to remember a space that filled us with some type of emotion. It can be the emotion, for example, that I feel getting off the plane in Puerto Rico, or stepping into my grandmother's home, whatever it is. Or it can be, an emotion in a room where something tragic or surprising or whatever happened. And by describing the room, you can communicate the emotion that you were feeling without giving it away. Okay? So what I want you to do is think about, thank Mark Doty, and then think about the first home you recall living in.
the first what?
Home. The first home you could recall living in. Just think about that for a moment. What did it look like? What street was it on? I can remember. Yeah. Sorry, tables. If you have something in there. And what I would like for you to do with this is, I actually want you to draw a floor plan. Did you get these kids? So what I want you to do is to draw a floor plan of that house. It might be 2 floors. You can either do 2 floors or 3 floors, or you can just pick one, right? And I want you to try and recall where things were. You might begin in the kitchen because that's the most vivid memory you have. You might begin in a bedroom, you might begin in the bathroom, in the playroom, whatever. But try and recreate the floor plan of that home. Right?
In words?
No, drawing. That's what. Yeah, no. I want you to draw it. Draw the floor plan. Right. That's what I do. Yeah. So, and I think the point of this is that the more that you recall, as you recall some things, other things will occur to you, right? It kind of more details will kind of rise to your consciousness. If you can't recall the first house very well, move to the second house. It's okay, right? The point is maybe an early memory. We're moving towards an early memory. So. Are you struggling with that?
I put it in words better than in.
Well, what do you remember? Why can't you do the floor plan? What would you struggle with?
I was a little kid, and the one thing I remember most is that many years later, when like 40 years later, I visited the place and looked like it was about half the size.
Right, that's right. Yeah.
That's the one impression.
Yeah. So can you recall? I mean, obviously, if you think that if it was half as big as you remembered it, you must remember something from that house. Yeah. So start with whatever detail you can remember. Okay. That's excellent. All right. So right now you probably have a pretty good outline of that house or that apartment or whatever it was. Now I want you to kind of think about the various rooms that you've mapped out. And I want you to kind of try and remember what it was like to be in those rooms. And maybe one of them somehow draws out a stronger emotional response than the others. Right? I think of, when I was growing up, I think of the room my brother and I shared. And immediately I start to get flooded with memories, things we used to do, games we used to play, how we teased each other, and all the emotions associated with that relationship. If I were to describe that room, those are the things that would come up. So start to think of which room seems to you the most, the one that resonates the most with you. It could be a very positive experience. Doesn't have to be about cancer or dictatorship.
What if you don't know the room, but you remember what was in it?
Okay, well that's good, because my next thing I want you to do is to start to, in your floor plan, which obviously you're going to not be able to do it with your floor plan, but you can do it on the side, is I want you to start to remember the things that were in the room. Where was the sofa? And what was that lamp? And what was that bauble? What was that? And, of course, each of these things has a history, right? Each of these things has a story. So hopefully as you start to recall, oh, that's right, that's where we kept the chest of toys, you'll start to remember, oh, we had that toy, that was my favorite. Okay? So more memories will come. So go ahead and draw in your floor plan things that you recall. Some maybe like hideous rug or sofa, like we had a bright yellow sofa. Now it's the hard part. I want you to try and recall either a moment, well maybe a moment or some recurring event that took place in that room, and I want you to describe it. I want you to think of Carolyn Forche's The Colonel as a model. I don't want you to get in the way. I want you to describe it and allow your description of that room to somehow, of course there might be some reflection about how you responded to the moment. But for the most part, I want you to imagine that you have a video camera and you're capturing the room and the event at the same time. And You might, like you described, kind of move into a room, back out, turn, move into another room. You can zoom in on particular details that you recall. Maybe like the color of the drapes, or a stain, or in the ceiling, or whatever it is that you remember. But think of yourself as the director of this moment that you are conveying to us. Okay?
I mean, are we supposed to put people in it and?
It's your event.
Okay.
If there are people, yes, yeah. Like
Okay.
think of
So
yeah.
we're supposed to
A moment is something can be happening. It could be a very subtle, tender moment. It could be like. It could be you looking out the window and seeing something and having some sort of epiphany. That's fine. It can be anything. But anyway, so write it like a block of prose. Right? This is your story. This very small piece by Carolyn Forche is the most anthologized piece she has, though she has done a lot of great writing. Just because it's small doesn't mean it's not important. You don't have to write, the great book-length memoir. When you feel like you're getting in the way too much, it starts to become too much of the self, go back to the details of the room. The space. Was it cold, warm, dim? Was the light a fluorescent light? If you are finished, maybe you can go over what you've written and see if you want to expand on something, or maybe examine a place where you get in the way of your story. Maybe there's some exposition that's unnecessary. How can you tighten it up to make it most powerful? Maybe you can add, you keep reading it, maybe something will occur to you that didn't occur to you before. Okay, so not every exercise will work with everyone. It's an impossible task to, but hopefully this worked with some of you, at least some of you, who felt like they wrote something kind of inspiring or interesting, had that, maybe 2 people, 3, yeah, just give me a little bit. Sometimes I write something that's really awful, but I know something's there, right? That's all you need, is that little bit of tension, that little something that you need to kind of explore more, right? So that's all I hope, you encounter. So will some of you share what you've written? Okay, and will you?
First of all, you're a good teacher. You have pushed me.
To keep it. I know you had like 2 sentences down, so it wasn't very difficult.
Because this was a long time ago. All right, I'll read it.
Will you first tell everybody your name? And
My name is James Jackson. I live in Missouri, and I'm an octogenarian. And this happened when I was 7 years old. And I don't think I need to go into details.
Yeah,
with it.
great. Cool. That's great.
The large bed with the scary painting above and behind it had me confined. Worse yet, I had to sleep in that bed with my sisters, 2 and 3 years older than me, I guess, or myself. Which is
I. Then I.
well, not I, older than me.
Then I am. I was.
Oh, then I am.
I was, yeah.
I was only 7 years old then, but I remember it well. It was a strange new experience because I hardly knew my sisters. I lived with my grandparents and they lived with my widower father. That's it.
Wow, okay. So that was really great. What a great memory, right? Very powerful. How can he make it even stronger? Any ideas? Because he wants to go away with suggestions, right? To take it, to push it as far as he can.
Sure.
I mean, it's a really compelling, it's a very compelling moment. It's very compelling. How can he tweak it? How can he make it a little bit stronger? Push it even further?
More description, maybe.
Yeah, like what? What would you
About
describe?
the bed maybe, because you get the sense that you're in the bed and there's other people in the bed, so maybe about more describing the size of it and how the bed
Yeah.
is confining you.
Yeah, exactly.
What is making it feel
All right.
confining.
The weight
All
of
right.
the blanket,
Uh-huh.
maybe, the weight of the blanket.
Or if it's not big enough.
Right. Yeah,
you
right.
pull for the blanket.
Also, oh, go ahead.
Are you sleeping between your
Yeah.
sisters? Are you crammed against the wall, or
Yeah.
you fall out of bed at night because they push?
Yeah. So, if you can kind of try and remember, where you were, that would be great. The feeling of these two strangers beside you, I love that, it was just very compelling, that detail, that you didn't know them really, and you're in a bed with them and you're related to them. I mean, it's a really compelling moment.
I didn't really think of that till this story brought it out of me.
Yeah.
That's
what
what's
happens.
peculiar.
Yeah. Well, maybe the kind of
Why did I remember it? And I think that's the reason.
yeah, and you could think. I mean, if you could describe even try and imagine and remember what the body felt like next to you, and how it was foreign. What does the painting look like above the bed? It's scary, but I mean, maybe you don't remember the image, but you remember the colors, right?
Remember, it was scary. That's
Yeah.
color.
But just keep, these are just, the options, ideas that you can move forward with if you choose. You don't have to, and maybe you'll think of even better things to describe and write about to kind of draw that out. But it really does capture that strange, that sense of being in a foreign place. Who else? Okay, let's hear you and then.
My name's Susie. And, cigarette smoke filled the room. The step stool chair was yellow with a raised rig around the seat. It was directly in front of the white, flimsy wooden workstation. An ashtray was always present, smoldering Parliament cigarette, and a pair of scissors and a towel was on top. Soon I'd be sitting there, scowl on my face, brow furrowed. Snip, 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 as my mother took another sip. My curly red locks hit the floor, gone from my head once more. Bangs were sure to be crooked.
Okay, good. What do you think about this? What do you find most compelling? Huh?
I couldn't quite hear it all from back here.
The snip, snip, there's always something about the cutting of
Right.
hair
Yeah.
that is compelling.
Yeah.
Especially if it's a first haircut, or if you have the hair that's cutting and hearing it
Right.
fall to the floor.
Right. We're getting a cold reading of something, so it's hard to remember those
Right.
things.
Is that what she said?
No, she did say that.
That's what I heard.
No, that's what she said. But I'm wondering, was there drinking at all involved?
Yes.
Okay, so that's really compelling. Someone's drinking and then they're holding.
I didn't get that.
Yeah. Well, she didn't come out, I don't think, and set. You didn't.
No.
Yeah. So she's smoking and drinking, and then she's picking up scissors. That's pretty terrifying. Just that in and of itself is pretty terrifying. So it's a great moment. It's a really great moment. I would say that rather than jump ahead and say there were sure to be crooked bangs, I would like to see the crooked bangs. You know what I mean? That would be a great image. Yeah.
Or almost like a staircase, maybe.
Yeah. Very nice. What other suggestions? Any other suggestions? Good. Yeah. And what you might do is, when I go to write memoir, I'm often overwhelmed. Writing a poem is very, very, I think it's very difficult, but at least you just have the one page. It might go on, but you don't know, and it's okay if it doesn't. But when you're trying to tell a story somehow of your past, it's, what details are important, where do I begin? And I feel overwhelmed by it. Again, maybe my ego is in the way. And so what I'll do is I'll go moment by moment, and I'll think room by room. And a memoir can be a series of moments, right? And so, this can help you. I often do this. I also do this when I'm writing poetry if I'm stuck, and I don't feel like my vision of what's happening is very clear. I'll just start to doodle in the corner, Like there's this, and oh yeah, I want this was here, or this would be here, or right, and then I'll draw on that from that to go back to the writing. Both of you, I think, had successful.
Sure.
So would you go ahead and read Daniel and then?
Okay. Do I need to explain the setting or just?
Nope. Just describe it.
Okay. Rats have their own smell. A single light bulb with a pull chain lit the room. The Michigan basement, the cement floor, and home to Snowball, my pet rat. It was also my playroom. Mom had a thing about kids and messes they make. If it was raining outside, Snowball, me, and my brothers would spend hours building creations out of wooden blocks, Lincoln Logs, and Tinker Toys. The large rug in the middle of the floor was center stage for all of our creations. One of us had to stand guard as Dad's pet alligator didn't get out of his little kiddie pool in the corner of the room. It was a little unnerving if we ever entered the basement and didn't see him in the pool.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And that's as far as I got.
That's great. What was it like writing that?
It kind of took me back to the smells.
Yeah.
You know, a basement, especially a stuffy Michigan.
Yes.
And if you understand a Michigan basement, I said that specifically because people in the north know
Right.
it's not cement walls and all clean and nice and neat. It's a bunch of cement and stones that have been banked to hold the dirt from caving in. It goes back to where the footings are. And
I wish
usually
you'd
there's-
described that in there.
Yeah.
That is,
Yes.
you just described it in a way that I don't understand. When you say Michigan basement, I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, it's a basement in Michigan. It could have been anywhere. It doesn't matter to me that it's in Michigan. But the way you just described it, think about that image of holding back the banks, how that has an emotion attached to it, what it seems to suggest figuratively, right? So always go for the details, the particular details. What you just said was fantastic. I would put that in there. Okay, so go ahead. What else was it like?
Well, the other thing that it conjures up is, you know, the other sights and smells, in addition to my pet rat.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
There was a crawl space. The crawl space is a dirty area that goes up underneath the rest of the house that you can't access from the basement. So the idea behind a Michigan basement is it doesn't encompass the whole house.
Right.
It's only part of the house. And this part was under the original house that hadn't been built onto yet. So when you go down there, you look and nothing's finished off. It's the stone walls that are holding back the dirt. And you can smell the old dirt from underneath the crawl space, and it kind of wafts out every time a draft flows up under the house.
Right, put that in there.
That's what you need to be.
All this,
mindful
put it in
of.
there.
Yes,
It's great.
absolutely.
You know, so, you know, and you hear the sound of the well kick off every now and then,
Yeah,
reminding
put
you
that in
that you're
there.
in the dungeon
Yeah,
of
put
the
that
house,
in there.
because Mom won't let you play upstairs because
Yeah.
it'll mess things up.
No, it's perfect. No, that came through very clearly, and that was very nice.
All the smells.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's good. Well, that's really fantastic. Your name?
Oh, Rusty.
Rusty.
I am starting out with myself though, but, and I may need to just
Yeah,
fix
I
that.
mean, you
Yeah.
guys just wrote this.
Right,
I would,
yeah, it's
you're
a-
brave,
yeah.
and I appreciate your participation. So,
My brother and I have the measles. Mom is pinning the curtains together, but still the morning sun is pushing through. Her fingers are moving like the spiders in our garage. She is standing still, only her fingers are moving, but it feels like all of her is heaving, her face is flushed. My brother and I are watching her, confused, a little scared, because she has said nothing. Just the curtains, pinning all the way to the top and pinning down to the floor. Then she runs into another room. I hear her jumbling through a drawer. I hear the clanging metal, and I know she is in the tool drawer in the kitchen at the bottom of our cabinet beside the sink that leaks sometimes underneath. Is she getting the wrench, I wonder, to stop a drip? But she rushes into the room where we are and drops a hammer, puts nails on the floor beside Dad's hammer. She runs into the bedroom, comes back, her arms heaped with bed sheets she's pulled from our beds. She pulls a chair over, grabs hammer, puts nails in her mouth like she does pins when she hems my dresses. She gets up on the chair and furiously begins to hammer the sheets all around the windows. Then she looks at us as if she has finally seen us, noticed us, and screams, "Cover your eyes, don't look at the sun, you'll go blind." My brother goes to his little chair and sits down.
Amazing. Wow. That's cool. That is really, so it's just very intense. And you can just tell in the description of the mother's frantic behavior how terrifying that would be for the children, right?
Yeah.
That confusion.
Yeah.
That comes through, you know, like, and I love how you will use all the senses, but then also you're imagining where she is in the other room. It shows that you're completely engaged by her. You're, you know, your attention is fully on her. And that's fantastic. It feels very urgent and immediate. So, all it's in present tense, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which helps to make it feel that way. Good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll read this one, but it's very short because I came in late.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if I followed the rules since I didn't hear
That's
this.
okay. Yeah, that's okay.
Let's see. The floor model stereo is standing, the dark house is quiet. Nobody is moving at 11:30 p.m. as I crawl down the hall toward the little box, the new TV that arrived today. It's sitting in the corner of the living room. TV, what does that stand for? Oh yes, television. Mother said not to touch it, but I have to find out if those heads are still moving inside the box. All the big lamps with round flowered hoods are off as I get closer and turn the knob. Click, wait, sizzle. No heads, just white speckles. Click, wait, sizzle. I lie down by the TV and wait. I wait some more. Click, wait, sizzle. When I wake up, Mother says, "Have you been here all night?"
That's a great memory. What a great memory.
That was the first, we had the first TV in our neighborhood, and so I hadn't seen one before.
Yeah, yeah.
I was about 7.
That's wonderful. I love that. I think you can make the time between the clicks longer.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Because I can imagine how she'd be anticipating, like you and excited. Would be excited to see the faces come forward, and then the disappointment. And I think you could build that tension by, in that, what you can do is when you click the TV on, turn the camera somewhere else to suggest a kind of passing of time.
But wasn't there a test pattern?
There was.
There
was a test
In the early days, when the TV went off, which was pretty early at night, there was a test pattern.
Oh, I remember that.
So as you describe the test pattern,
right.
could get the more.
And the TV had this sound. It was like,
Right.
that's right.
It was like a sizzle, but it was,
That's really, it's a really wonderful moment that it really captures the child's kind of curiosity and excitement, and but also she's a little sneaky, right? And so you have a lot of character there. Like you feel very present, but it doesn't feel again like self-centered, right? Who else? Yeah. Can you tell us your name?
I'm Jim Marshall, and I grew up here, in Clarksville on Dunlop Lane, for those of you who know Clarksville, where the hospital is now. My grandmother spoke British English to me as she rocked me every day. My mother was always in the kitchen. I saw Mother at the oak dining room table for her 3 fully cooked meals for the family of 5. I also had a second breakfast with my grandmother and her brother. He called me Mr. Second Breakfast. We 3 had English tea made from a 5-pound tin box ordered from Boston. Their accents set me apart from others on Dunlop Lane. I knew I was special even in the Great Depression. I still feel this way today.
Great, nice. What do you guys? What stood out to you guys? What seems memorable, most memorable to you?
The accents.
The accent?
The 5-pound thing of tea from Boston.
Yeah. The tea in that, is the teapot that's described too, or just the tea?
No,
Just the tea?
just the square tin, you know,
Oh,
very
yeah.
decorated.
It's very nice.
And
You know,
Mr.
it lasts
Second
for a year.
Breakfast. Yeah, I like that stuck out, Mr. Second Breakfast.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, what else seems to stand out? Or where did you want more, maybe? I think that the mother is
Yeah.
fascinating. That the mother is in the kitchen. Yeah, I would love to know more about that.
And the separation between the mother, you go from the mother
Yeah.
to almost a different family,
Yeah.
maybe.
Well,
And
the
I
son
got
is
that
aligned with the
separation.
grandmother and the great uncle, not
Yes.
with the mother. So
Yeah.
there's something
Yeah,
kind of odd about
there's
that,
a
which is
tension or
yeah.
something, not tension, but tension in the story,
Yeah, yeah.
maybe. I
Yes,
don't know.
absolutely. Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that's right.
But
Good.
that wasn't unusual at the time. There were multi-generations living together.
Right, right.
Often the parents were too busy, and the ones who had more time had a special relationship with the children.
Yeah. No, I imagine that's true. But the way it was written, there, even if there was no conflict, the division feels very present, and that is what even if it's common, it feels like rich, right? That for exploration. Yeah.
I was kind of picking up a little bit of, I don't know how you describe it, it's more of a, they weren't commoners, they're more of a,
Yes.
more polished. They got tea they ordered from Boston. Mentioned the wood furniture, specific kind of wood furniture as if it meant something.
The accents.
The
from Britain,
accents.
like they're from the.
So it's kind of an
country.
upper crust kind of
Yes.
feel to it,
Absolutely.
not commoners.
Right. You wouldn't see them working, maybe, Good, very good observation. Who else?
The kitchen has a breakfast nook against the window. It has a polished pine tabletop, while the benches have red vinyl cushions, a necessity for young children. At the age of 4, my place at meals is in a high chair at the end of the nook. That's for babies. I always want to sit on a bench. I want to be one of the big girls. One day at lunch, I sit down before everyone else and curl up in the corner, hoping to remain unnoticed. What joy when Daddy sits down next to me and squeezes me against the wall as if he hadn't seen me.
That's good. That's very, very nice. I think you could take out some of the exposition and just describe the moment of the high chair, and then either pushing it aside or then just, you know what I mean? Like, and then having the father come in. It's such a great moment. Sometimes what happens when someone starts to explain too much, it takes me out of the moment that you've already created. It's so, you know what I mean? You're creating a world for us, and then so those are like fine. That's just fine, tuning, tweaking. But
I found myself questioning, how can you remember that at that age? Because that's such a young age. How do you write about it, and how do you write in such a way that it's believable that everybody really believes you experienced that?
Well, just first of all, my brother has the strangest memory. He remembers things at a very young age. I think my first memory is like from when I was 8 or something. But for him, I'm exaggerating. But he remembers, my grandfather's funeral, which happened when he was like not even 3. I mean, he remembers specific events, and so I believe that it could be like that. But also, just an interesting kind of fact is that Ann Patchett and Lucy Greeley were good friends, and great friends, best of friends. And she wrote a book after Lucy Greeley passed away, and in it, she talked about how people were saying, it's amazing, how do you remember all those details? And she says, I didn't, I made it up. But I don't know if she made it all up, but you can't remember. Nobody can remember all of the details. You don't want to kind of lie and create some say that something happened that didn't happen, something big and important. But a lot of this does require imagination. Even when you're doing your floor plans, a lot of people are like, "Where'd that bathroom go?" Your memory is flawed. So no matter what you write, there are going to be some things that are off. But what a lot of memoirs say is, more important than the factual truth is the emotional truth, right? You want to try and approach it with the with the kind of openness and that doesn't reflect a kind of bias you're conscious of. So aiming for an emotional truth, and from that story, I can really feel the sense of someone wanting to not be the baby anymore. Like, I don't think she needs to say, "I didn't want to be the baby anymore." That gesture of maybe pushing aside the high chair tells me that. It's a moment in which she sees herself as growing older. I remember the first time I opened the front door of my house, which was a huge door, and I was like, I could leave if I wanted to, And I just thought, wow, things are different. I just realized I'm getting older, I'm strong enough to do that. And so that felt like that kind of moment. Anybody else? Yeah.
My name's Chase, by the way. Chase. I'm from Humboldt, Tennessee, which is in West Tennessee. And this happened when I was like 4 or 5. I found a syringe lying on a counter in my kitchen. It was hard to reach, so I used an old mop bucket that had been chewed around around the rim by our dogs as a stool. I walked past my parents, who were both asleep on the blue couch that was always covered in pet hair. I sat on the floor in my room and began to pull and push the back of the syringe to hear the hiss of air rushing through the needle. It slipped during a push, though. That's all I got. Sorry, I had 2 minutes. So.
Yeah, that's really, really powerful. So what did you guys like about this? What is most memorable? Maybe that's the way
The FS?
That's a nice particular detail. I mean, it's just the. I don't think you need to tell people you're 4. I think that.
I know.
Yeah, it really comes through. It's just the whole idea of finding a syringe and playing with it. That's kind of. I have a young child that freaks me out. That would make me flip if I saw him with a syringe. So what were you gonna say?
Just the whole, starting out with the syringe,
Yeah.
and even the name syringe, it's.
We're like, what is
Powerful.
it? Is this?
Yeah.
Is this? You're wondering, is this like diabetes, or is there
Yeah,
addiction, or is it,
you don't know.
It's really like what you have heard is true. It's a very engaging opening line. I would say, instead of saying, "I found a syringe," just describe the syringe, right? Because that's an example of getting in the way of the moment, right? Yes, of course you found it, you're describing it, right? It's kind of like, Jim, you said, "I saw my mom in the other room." You don't have to say it. My mom was stood in the other room. And it's, because what you're doing is you're placing yourself in between the moment and the reader.
I could see him reaching for because he was little, reaching for this syringe. So maybe that, I don't know.
There's a moment, I've seen that in my son's eyes so many times when he sees something that he I must have that. Mine.
Yeah.
He says, mine. And it's just like he must have it. And you could describe the syringe in such a way, give us a moment that, because my son is his eyes get bigger, he's completely engaged by it. Describe the syringe so that we sense the that desire to have it, and then describe grabbing it, walking past, and the air. I could stay with that image longer. And I actually don't think even with beginnings, you can sometimes sense the arc of a story, how long it's gonna go. I don't think this is necessarily a very long story. It could be, but it could be very short. You know what I mean? It could end in that. It could be just that moment. I don't know, but don't feel like you need to give us all of the that background. You might suggest why there's a needle on the countertop without putting on giving it. Anybody else? Okay, so why don't we end this here now, and then I'm happy to talk with anybody if you have any questions about memoir. And and I just wanted to point out, it says that I'm teaching another craft lecture tomorrow. I'm not. I'm actually doing a reading. So if you wanted another craft lecture, I'm sorry. So anyway, thank you very much for coming. I appreciate it, and thank you for sharing. It's not easy to write on the spot and then share it. I know it's not easy, so I really appreciate it.
The exercise was very useful, though.
Good exercise.
Good.